Hello, everybody. Yes, we're speaking English. It's our first English slot for this BI or Die Level Up event. And of course, we looked for a very special one. So we are very, very happy that David Stephenson is here with us. He's a true data and AI leader, I would say. More than 20 years of experience leading those initiatives. I think I read that he was working in 6 continents already on this topic. Multiple industries, very well-known global brands he consulted. So a very, very experienced guy. And on top of that, he's author of multiple books, speaker at various events, and also a part-time faculty of one of the largest universities in Europe, the University of Amsterdam. So very, very, very interesting personality on top of that. And today he's going to speak about core principles for dashboarding, but not only from the above, more or less, but really from out of his experience. And he also admitted that once or twice in the past, he also made those bad, painful dashboards. So for out of this experience, we're very happy that you are here. We like to bring you now on stage. And yeah, David, it's a pleasure that we have you here being part of this BI or Die Level Up session. And yeah, we hope that we prepared the stage as best as possible for you. And now we are looking forward to your impulses on the core principles for dashboarding.
Okay, great. Thanks. Thanks for the introduction. Good to be here. I was telling the guys earlier, I've been actually working really hard to learn German over the past couple months. So my German is getting better and not good enough yet to do the presentation in German. But if you invite me back next year, then, who knows, maybe. So yeah, what I'm going to talk about today is dashboards. I'm going to give you a quick introduction to who I am, just to set the background and the context for this. So I am from the US originally, did a PhD in mathematics, a very technical background. What I do less is a bit less technical than previously. Started DSI Analytics about 9 years ago, also part-time faculty, as they said, at the University of Amsterdam. So I teach there part-time, do program development part-time for them. Wrote a couple books over the years. Neither one is translated into German yet, but they are translated into another about half a dozen other languages. I'm going to reference the second book today because some of the content I have is in the book. So I'll get back to that a little later. In terms of background that might be most relevant for you guys, for a couple of years, I was head of global business analytics for eBay Classifieds Group. So that's a global network spread across 6 continents. In terms of the German market, that's the eBay Kleinanzeigen and the mobile.de. Right, so I headed up the BI for these guys and also the global analytics. So we had a team working on a lot of really large databases. The guys were based in Shanghai. The data was in the US. All our consumers were spread across the world. So a lot of dashboards there, a lot of data projects, business analytics, that kind of stuff. Since leaving them, the past 9 years, worked with quite a number of different companies. Some of them were German, some of them you guys know, especially Sky Germany, of course, things like that. Insurers, media companies, that type of thing. So a lot of, all to say, sort of, I've worked with a lot of different industries and I've seen a lot of what's being done with BI, with dashboarding. I've seen some good things. I've seen a lot of bad things. Typically when I go into a project, because I'll go into projects and lead programs for a couple months, typically, sometimes a couple years. A lot of what I try to do is to help, especially the data scientists, the BI people, help them do better visualizations, better dashboards. Because what I've seen over the years is there's a lot of really easy wins in this area that people don't take advantage of. In terms of content, in the book that I wrote, which you'll see behind me, the black one, the second one, there's 3 sections in that which directly relate to dashboarding and visuals, and they talk about the who, the why, and the what of communication. I'm not really going to reference the book too much, but a lot of what I talk about will be taken from the book. Okay, so to start with some introductory examples, I'd like to show a few visuals just to give an illustration of what's out there. Here's one you'll see is from Germany, based on the title. Okay, and I like to ask people sort of, what is it? Is this a good visual? What's wrong with this kind of visual? And people generally say, yeah, this visual is a very bad visual. It's extremely cluttered and distracting, and it's hard to really get any insights out of it. Okay, then we've got another visual here, and this is a real visual. Someone produced this. They actually wanted to use it to show value. And when we look at this, we're like, yeah, obviously this is an extremely confusing visual. It's not really helping me with anything. If I had enough time, I could probably get something out of this, right? But people would generally look at this and say, these are both really bad visuals. Okay, both this one and this one. Now, the problem is, as analytics experts, as BI experts, we look at those first two and we say, yeah, those are terrible. But really in our own work, we very often produce visuals like this. We look at this and we say, yeah, this is a normal visual. But to our non-analytic audience, this is just as confusing as the first two charts that I showed. Okay, we've gotten used to this kind of visual, but for a non-technical audience, it's not really helping them. And I often see dashboards that look like this. This is like a very normal, plain vanilla dashboard, which again, we think this is normal. But if I stop to look at it from the perspective of our audience, and I really think about what a dashboard should be, this is also terrible. So let me get back to this. Let me take a step back and talk about why these are so bad and how we can sort of think in a better, more systematic way about producing good visuals in general and dashboards in particular. Okay, so what I see is that there's analysts are failing to make the first fundamental decision of how to present their data. And that first fundamental decision is, do I use a graph or do I use a table? Okay, and there's not always an obvious right answer for this until we think about a couple of factors. Think about what's the purpose, what's the audience, and we can just look at these and say, yeah, I feel that there's a real difference here. Okay, I feel that if I look at the one on the left, the bar chart, I instantly get an insight. I get a high level insight into a pattern. And if I look at what's on the right, nothing jumps out at me, but I have the ability to start a discussion, to drill down into things, right? So I need to consciously make a decision of graph versus table, depending on the purpose and the audience. Okay, I need to understand that each of those has their own purposes, their own strengths and their own weaknesses. Okay, and that needs to be a conscious choice. And unfortunately, what I see often with visuals and with dashboards is people aren't making that conscious choice. Often they're defaulting to tables because that's what comes out of your SQL query, or because your finance team is your primary stakeholder and they're comfortable with tables. Okay, but we don't want to always use tables just because it's the default or because it's easiest. Let me show you the power of graphics here. Here's a simple table. This is specifically some numbers related to public opinion in different countries. This is a good one for discussion, but no insights really jump out of it just by looking at the table. If I was going to show you the same thing as a horizontal bar chart, you could see that a lot more insights will jump out immediately because of the visual nature. Okay, immediately I can see that Philippines has the smallest unfavorable and the largest favorable. I can see that Turkey has the largest unfavorable, right? So these visual insights come out with a bar chart when they won't come out with a table. So I consciously want to make that decision in that discussion. Do I want something which is going to have the strength of a table, or do I want something that's going to have the visual pattern strength of a graph? Okay, so as I said, most analysts are not making that conscious decision with their visuals, with their presentations, and with their dashboards. When you decide that you do want to use a graphic because of the strengths that it has and patterns and instant recognition of things, then the next step is to figure out which is the best graphic to use. And here again, we're really falling short. Okay, so bar charts are fantastic. Essentially, bar charts do one thing really, really well. Because of their really heavy visual weight, bar charts make the largest element stand out instantly. So they're really good for comparing magnitude. Okay, that's what the bar charts are for. And I can do that with one series or several series. But I want to put three of these side by side with you: the scatter plots, the line plots, and the bar charts, just to show you that if I have just one series, there's not a huge difference between them. But once I start doing multiple series, you can see that there's really a difference in how effective those three different options are. Okay, so in this case, yeah, the bar chart is best for comparing magnitudes, but it really does not do a good job of showing a trend. In fact, the line chart is the only thing that's really doing the trend. Okay, so I want to remember that if the purpose of my visual is to show a trend, I want to stick with the line chart. If the purpose is the bar chart, is the magnitude, then I want to stick with the bar chart. Okay, and the scatter plots really are going to lose their value with multiple series. They're good really for just recognizing basic patterns. To illustrate again with that, let me show you another case where a bar chart was used for a series. Okay, here again, this is the wrong choice. Bar charts, like I said, are great for magnitude, but they're not showing the series in a good way. They're really cluttering things up, causing a lot of cognitive overload. If I do this same bar chart as a line chart, you can see how much cleaner it is, how much easier it is for my audience to follow the series, the trend that's in there. Okay, so really, if we want to use a graphic, we want to make sure we're using the right graphic. Bar charts for magnitude, line charts for trend. Otherwise, we've got a lot of overload, and it's going to be more difficult for our audience to get the trend and the basic point we want. Now, another big problem is when we create a visual, we don't think about the pain we're causing for our audience. So this example, I'm showing the visual pain of having too much clutter in a bar chart. It's not easy to follow the trend. There's other ways that we torture our audiences, right? Here, for example, right? If we we do this very often because it comes straight out of our graphics tool. But if we think about our audience's perspective, our audience now has to turn their head sideways to read the labels. Okay, we know it's painful, but we do it anyways. Now, in fact, studies have been done to show just how painful this is. This 90-degree rotation of your labels actually slows your audience down by 205%. So sometimes we'll go ahead and we'll say, okay, well, I'll rotate it 45%. And we think we've solved the problem, but we know that we really haven't. Okay, and in fact, this 45-degree rotation is still slowing our audience down by 52%. If we took our audience's perspective, when we create our dashboards and our visuals, it's so much easier just to make horizontal labels. And from our audience's perspective, this takes a lot of load off of them, and they're able to process the information that we give them with less effort and have more energy and more concentration left over to focus on the actual message. Okay, and again, from our audience's perspective, do we stop to think how difficult it is for them to see which is the largest element? Is it B or is it D? Well, in fact, it's almost impossible for our audience to see in this pie chart and in many pie charts which the largest slices are. Compare this with the same information in a bar chart, where because of the nature of a bar chart, our audience can instantly see which is the biggest slice. Okay, but bar charts are not always the best solution. And we abuse them in other ways. So a bar chart we abuse when we use it to represent data where there's a big difference in magnitude. And again, from our audience's perspective, the purpose of a bar chart is to make it easier for them to process data. But in a situation like this, it's much harder, right? Because of the three on the right are about the same size, the bar chart doesn't benefit them at all. If instead I used an area chart, in this case, because of the large differences in magnitude, I'm making it easy for my audience to process the information and visually see the difference in a meaningful way. Similarly, I could use circle charts for this. Again, a situation where the data is growing vastly in magnitude, and a line chart wouldn't do a good job of representing this growth, but an area chart would. Okay, so I need to make these conscious decisions. I need to make sure my bar charts are always centered at 0, so that I'm not misleading my audience by having a non-zero base. Again, the purpose of the bar chart is to compare magnitude. Here is not being done. Another example of that, some of you may have seen it, another bar chart essentially where it's not centered at 0, giving a really misleading message. Case like this, it's much better to use a dot plot. Okay, dot plots don't have to be centered to 0, but they do show the relationship and magnitude. These are going to be really useful, especially in dashboards, because they're very concise. Those are a few tips and tricks. What we really want is more systematic ways to produce better visuals. Here's where we're gonna start leveraging things like Gestalt principles. Okay, because of Gestalt, my audience knows to read the graph on the left from vertically and the graph on the right horizontally. Because of Gestalt principles, it doesn't bother me that the WWF mascot doesn't have a top of a head or a back. We can be kind of nasty and confuse our audience with Gestalt principles. Okay, because of two conflicting Gestalt principles, we're not quite sure how to follow the blue line from top to bottom. Okay, these are all these subconscious ways that we can leverage in our visuals to guide our audience. We can leverage pre-attentive attributes to instantly focus the attention of our audience where we want it to be focused. Okay, here I'm using the color yellow as a pre-attentive attribute to guide my audience. But there's really 6 or, well, I've got 9 here. There's more, but 9 primary pre-attentive attributes that we should be leveraging to help guide the focus of our audience in our visuals and in our dashboards. Also, best practice, always declutter. And I'm not seeing this done nearly enough. Take out every element that's not necessary, not core to your message. And as we leave just the core elements in our visuals and our dashboards, we're freeing up our audience to not be distracted by the clutter. Also, we want to think about visual hierarchies. Okay, what's a visual hierarchy? Take a look at the next slide. Okay, so here's an example of something with 4 levels of visual hierarchy. And through proper design, you can create a visual where you have a pretty good idea in what order your audience is going to read the visual. The advantage of this is that you're able to guide the processing, and you're also able to help your audience create sort of a mental structure of the information, which makes it easier for them to process it in their own mind. Okay. In general, when we're creating visuals, we should always be conscious of visual hierarchies. We should create them in a conscious way, and we should be aware of what they are as we're presenting so that we know what order information is going through the minds of our audience. Okay, so let's focus specifically on dashboards. Okay, those are general principles. Those, what I've said before, apply to slides and dashboards, and we want to keep them in mind with our dashboards. But specifically when we're talking about dashboards, there are some really good principles we want to keep in mind. And I'm going to reference Stephen Few's book. For those of you who haven't seen it, it's a really good title on this topic. So with dashboards, we've got a specific purpose. And the purpose of the dashboard here is the situational awareness without the information overload. Okay, so this is different than a self-service tool. Your dashboard is something that people can look at a regular basis to get the situational awareness. Okay, this is going to help them see where there's a problem, an anomaly, that type of thing, and take action on it. Okay, what it's not, a dashboard by nature is not a self-service tool. It's not something that I'm going to look at every few weeks or few months. Okay, so I know when we create these in our companies, I know we've got our dashboarding pages where we've got all sorts of one-off requests that we do. You know, someone asking for this information, self-service, whatever. These are technically not dashboards. Those are technically self-service tools. When I'm talking about a dashboard, it's the single page for situational awareness. So with the technique of a dashboard, there's a couple things we want to do. Yeah, we want it to be single page so that we can glance at it. It's like the dashboard on your car. You want everything there in one glance. We want it to be immediately understandable. Okay, so you have to make the effort, and this is back to what I talked about a few minutes ago, that if you're looking at it within a few seconds, you instantly get the insight. Okay. Now, there's a difference with dashboards and presentations in the sense that a presentation generally has to be immediately understandable to a general audience. A dashboard could be immediately understandable to a specific target audience, which means that a random person looking at your dashboard may not understand it immediately. but your target audience who looks at it every day should immediately get the insights that they need from it. So typically the visual elements, because of these two things, we need very concise visual elements. Okay, they need to fit in a small space and they need to communicate instantly. Okay, this means less clutter, and it also means, so it means eliminating the clutter, and it means also choosing the visuals which are going to communicate most effectively. For example, whether it's a line chart versus a bar graph, a dot chart, that type of thing. In terms of what we're going to put in it, typically we're going to choose the things which are going to influence performance. As some people say, if someone isn't getting promoted or fired based on the information, then it shouldn't be in the dashboard. Also, it should be fit to the mental model of your audience. Here again, we're coming back to the theme of anything we produce should be something which is meaningful to our audience. Your dashboard should be built in close collaboration so that the way in which your target audience is thinking, what's important to them, how they process information is represented in that dashboard. Here again, this means that your dashboard may not be immediately intuitive to your non-audience, but to your audience is very meaningful. Your dashboard should have context. When people look at it, they should know, is this a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Are we doing better than before or worse than before? The context may be something like a benchmark, how are your competitors doing, what's your historical data, how did we do last week, last year at this time, seasonally, how do we compare to targets? Okay, you always want that in there because people need to look at your dashboards and say, we're doing well, we're not doing well, and you need a context for that. Often you'll have segments and analogies, deep dives, that type of thing. Here we're getting into a little bit more slippery ground because the more detail we put in, the less concise we are, the more distracting it is. But you do want to talk to your end user about what segments they want in there. Common elements being used for dashboards, which are not always used in a general presentation. Of course, spark lines, right? Spark lines give you a very concise way to see a trend without the details. The dot plots, which we mentioned before, a very concise way to consider changes in magnitude without needing to have a base at 0, like I would need with a bar chart. Also visually, a lot less overwhelming than a bar chart would be. And the third thing which Stephen Few introduced, which are very common in graphs, in dashboards, of course, are the bullet graphs. Okay, so a lot of information in a very concise tool with the bullet graph. It's good for monitoring things. I've got the performance in the bar. I've got a marker for my target or some sort of benchmark. And the background fill lets me know things, certain ranges, if I want to say good, bad, or satisfactory. Okay, so we're going to use bullet charts very often in a dashboard. They're not as common in a normal presentation, of course. I could also use it to show the forecast, right? Where I've got revenue to date versus the forecast. Also a very nice, concise way to give that context. Of course, in a dashboard, I'll combine these elements in a concise way so that I can see both actual information, trend lines with the spark lines, colors for good, bad, that type of thing, right? So I'll design dashboards in this way using those different elements. But again, with the core principles in mind. Here's an example of a very basic mobile dashboard from Stephen Few's book. Yeah, so I think I'm just about out of time here. So let me not really spend too much more time on this. Mock-up from Uber. A few examples here of what people would consider as a good dashboard because of the mix of elements and such. Let me just briefly talk about some common dashboard mistakes that people make. Obviously not fitting it on one screen. Missing the context for the data. And again, that's often the benchmarks or what I can compare it to. Too much detail or precision. This is an extremely common problem. Too much detail could be too much fluctuation data, but it's often when I give more than 3 significant digits. Most of your audience doesn't need more than 3 significant digits, unless they're the finance team and they're really, really care about those things. So expressing measures indirectly. So you want to really report exactly what they care about. Choosing the wrong diagram, as I mentioned before, it's really important pie charts can be really dangerous because they don't give you that quick insight, but there's a lot of other examples of that. Meaningless variety. I want to use too many colors. I want to be creative unnecessarily. Yeah, and then a few other things you'll see here, just standard mistakes that people make. Unattractive display, of course, that's kind of obvious, but good. So I have a few more slides. Let me skip over this one, a few of these, because I don't want to take too much time for that. And I'll move into the question and answering. And another slide I wanted to mention about a training I have coming up, but I'll put that up, I think, at the end, if that's the best way to do that. And we can move into the discussion phase, or the Q&A phase now.
Oh, cool, David. Thanks a lot for your impressions. Directly, the first question which came to my mind. I mean, we said we're basically focusing on German-speaking markets. Obviously, our dashboards we design concern the part of standardization a lot. But just from that perspective of the core principles for good dashboard design, did you observe worldwide the same idea of the core principles? Are there local differences? What can you say from your global view, being part of, I don't know, 6 continents of doing dashboarding? Is it similar? Are there differences? What could you observe?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't see a difference in terms of like the culture or the location. What I see is more a difference in terms of the mentality of the company, right? So you've got some companies that are very data driven, where the executives and the leaders really want to understand the data. And those are the companies who will push back on their BI people and say, please give me this, please give me this. Or self-service, whether it's a dashboard or as a self-service tool. And then that's where those are the people who are not going to be happy with really bad information or bad design. But I'm not really seeing a difference in terms of like the German market versus the American market or something in terms of the design.
Oh, okay, because I heard like, but then it was a prejudice like that IBCS is popular in German and in Eastern Europe, but it's not a big deal in the US. And that's why SAP is focusing on IBCS and Microsoft is not. But then it's not your experience, actually.
Oh, wait, I thought the question was about the design, right?
Yeah, but IBCS is a design principle.
Oh, okay. Yeah, okay, so to be honest, I am not familiar with that principle.
Okay, so yeah, it's a lots of also similar stuff as you told. Not everything. We can deep dive in this. Lots about focus on bar charts, focus on visual tables, no clutter, always compare values to each other. So I recognized a lot of things also we, Kai and myself, love to make. I also recognized some differences because you like to use the lines in one chart, like the 3 countries line in one chart. We would use, I think, more small multiples even for this way, because it's still, if you see 3 trends in one graph, it may be also distractive. I don't know how you think, Kai, about this. It's something I noticed. Okay, it's a little difference, and we can discuss about.
But as at least seeing it from this global perspective, I guess that the focus of IBCS, they call it International Business Communication Standards. Jürgen Feist and Rolf Fichert, those are the guys pushing that. And this was more or less also our initial starting point for founding our organization. Of course, they made also their success rules incorporating all those Stephen Fuse, etc. in this world, of course. But I mean, that's a clear message from a global perspective. So I can never heard of that. So this is also quite clear. I mean, Stephen Few, fantastic guy. I also had the chance once to meet him in London. So this is definitely very, very familiar stuff you presented here. So yeah, but because I always tend to observe, but maybe as I discussed it also with Americans, this approach of trying to standardize as much as possible, saying, okay, in case you have some discussions, it's always good to have a clear standard, saying, okay, we use our bars, we use our deviation charts, for example. It's always better to have kind of a standard, because there's always this non-analytical audience, and if they have some guidance and then they do their standards, it's adding value. In comparison, they always think of something and try to be creative, etc. But what's your take on that, being as standardized as possible throughout your dashboard? Or is it really that you say, okay, you need to focus on the audience, you need to focus on really the purpose of the dashboard in developing it?
Yeah, the standardization, that's a good one, right? So especially with global companies, it's a real challenge, because what happens is you get the different local units that are doing their own analysis, they have their own data and such, their own semantics. And then when you try and roll that data up to a global level, then a lot of problems start to surface, inconsistencies and different terminology and that type of thing. I think the design and presentation of that is sort of the tip of the iceberg. The harder thing is actually getting the data standardized in terms of how it's processed, the different layers of analysis and processing that go into it. Obviously, as you present it, there's going to be one person consolidating that for presentation at board level, and then it's got to be standardized. If you've got an executive who's reading multiple reports, which are independently done, then it would make sense to standardize it, right? I haven't seen such a big push for that in general, but I have heard people complain about the pain of the data from the units not being standardized. I think another perspective on it is, because I hear you guys talking about some of these standard procedures and such. I think as a BI company, you guys are maybe tuned into this a bit more, like what is a proper dashboard design and such. What I see, like I'm often working internally at companies, and I'm working with their internal teams of data scientists, or I'm working with machine learning engineers, right? So business analysts, machine learning engineers, data warehouse people who tend to be a bit more focused on the technology rather than on the dashboard design. And I'm seeing that these people often are not tuned into design principles at all. And often what they produce is really painful for the end audience, really confusing, really overwhelming. And they don't put the time into it, and they don't make the effort to develop the basic skills, or even to get the peer feedback on their slides. So I think these guys, I'd say most of the working analytics world is probably several steps down from where you guys are in terms of your professional work, because this is what you focus on.
You just have to Google for the term dashboard, and you see a lot of awful stuff there, because it's like a playground. I understand this. You have so great tools, and then you can use it and create your piece of art, but nobody besides you understands this.
But if you continue before we continue the discussion on the dashboarding part, maybe just first this information design or proper selection of charts. We have one question here from Philip, for example. What's your take on adding trend lines as an addition onto visuals, or does that add too much clutter?
It depends on the message, right? So for the sparkle, I'm not sure if I completely understand the question. I think trend lines are really good for context. So if you want that context, and usually you do want that context, then they're really good.
Okay, clear opinion on that. The next thing, what was thought, will it come during your presentation, or which is quite important for us, or even if I consult companies in this visual design thing, I always talk about the deviation chart, because I made the experience that people not always tend to say, okay, on the whole numbers, but seeing the difference to any reference value they have, like the previous year, like the budget, like something like that. So what do you think actually about deviation chart as a deviation bar chart?
Yeah, this is super important, right? To get that and this is back to the context, right? So what I see a lot of times is people putting the data out there, but you don't know if it's good or bad, right? How does it compare to, seasonality? How did we do last year at this time of year or 2 years ago? Of course, that's really hard now because of everything going on the last couple of years. And so then you can, in some sense, you want to understand that context, and which is deviation, right? But in terms of exactly how you present it, like, you talk about a deviation chart. That is something where I definitely work closely with my end user to say, look, is this representation useful for you? Would you rather have a representation which shows, like a bar chart with percent deviation, or, it's centered at 0 with, so there's a lot of different ways to do that, and you want to present it to them in a way that's meaningful. But what I've seen, like when I have discussions, is you'll get 10 people in a room and there'll be typically like 3 different primary camps, and 3 people will say, I really like it this way. 4 people will say, I really like it that way. And the other 3 people will say something else, right? So I say, think of all the options, present it to the audience, and then come up with something which they feel is helpful for them.
So that's always this individual style, asking the core people or those people really using the dashboard or the representation you prepare, but really focus, okay, what do they like more or less, or how do they perceive it? How do they think they get added value out of that?
Yeah, and this is like the foundational challenge of working in analytics, right? Which goes much further than dashboard design. It's, how can I, as a technical person, understand my audience, especially a non-technical audience, and present something that's meaningful to them? And it really requires communication, a lot of communication.
That's definitely also our learning. Also, we're in a very technical driven area. The communication is one of the core things, really, to figure out what are really the dashboards, how do they dashboards add value, what are the questions, etc., etc. But we continue in a few seconds with the dashboarding part. I also have a few questions in that direction. But the last thing I want to ask, not only on the basic chart, but also the advanced charts, because it's one of my favorite visualization, and often we use that. This area chart is the tree map. What do you think about the tree map?
Well, that's the tree map. I think is the square area chart, right? Where you've got and again, I think that's essentially what I showed on the one slide, right? So it's really good for if there's a large difference in magnitude, then it does a good job.
Okay.
I mean, I don't know if that's enough of an answer for you, right?
Well, that's fine.
Oh, yeah.
That's totally okay. And also one interesting, and that's maybe going forward to the dashboard part, you contrasted a bit a dashboard versus self-service report. So could you just again focus on the difference, or how would you contrast the dashboard versus the self-service report?
Oh yeah, I know, it's a huge difference, right? So the whole self-service really came into vogue, about 8-9 years ago, right? Tableau really, I mean, it used to be we had, at eBay, we had MicroStrategy, and you had to really put a lot of effort in to get a new MicroStrategy dashboard. And then Tableau came in and people were like, hey, I can do this myself. Isn't this great? Until it started costing a ton of money. And the concept was, and then Gardner had this citizen data scientist. So the idea is you put the data in the hands of the people and they can start playing around with it. Let me do this segmentation, this date range, that kind of stuff, right? But the dashboard is really like, look, I'm running my business. I know what I care about. I want to make sure nothing broke last night, right? So I'm not going to like dial it up and switch things and do deep dive. The deep dives are going to be when I see something wrong, I'm going to do a deep dive self-service to see what happens. The dashboard is like, hey, I know what I care about in general. I want to make sure everything is still going kind of the way I expect in some context compared to this time of year, compared to my competitors, right? So that's really different. And again, the dashboard, the word dashboard is a great one because it's like when you get in your car, you want to be able to see that, glance at it, and then just drive the car. You don't want to have to open up the hood and start screwing things around or hooking in your USB cable and changing, flash software to it to change things. You just want a quick look to see. And that's the dashboard concept.
But so would you also contrast that then in the way saying, okay, the dashboards, that's more for the strategic decision-making part, and the rest is more for the operative stuff?
Oh, no. And again, it's just semantics, right? So, you can call a dashboard whatever you want. Generally speaking, the dashboard has an audience, right? So, obviously your DevOps guys have dashboards. They want to know, what's the throughput, what's the if there's downtime, what's the load, those are all things that they just need to do their operations. But I mean, you can call it whatever you want to, but the point is that we need to create dashboards. We need to create tools which are helping people on a daily basis be situationally aware. And the problem is that a lot of companies are creating what they call dashboards, but really what those were, they were one-off analysis that were created, put in some folder and never looked at again, or they can't be looked at again without a specialist, right? So we want both of those things there. We definitely want self-service tools, but we don't want to call our one-off analysis. We don't want to call that a dashboard in the situational awareness sense of the tool. And if our company doesn't care that we don't have dashboards, then that's a big worry because it means they're not being data aware. They're not being data driven. If they've got a bunch of self-service tools in a folder somewhere that they never look at and they call those dashboards, that means that really they're operating the company on gut feel.
What do you think about interactivity in dashboard? I mean, you mentioned all those elements within the dashboard, the spark lines, etc., etc. So multiple visual elements, or the bullet graph, also from Steam View, etc.
Yeah.
So what do you think about the interactivity within the dashboard? So by speaking, okay, click into one element and then some filter activity or something like that, or even hierarchical drills, so that you, I don't know, click in the region A and then you click and you receive the underlying countries or something like that. What do you think about those interactivities?
I think self-service is great, right? Then you're moving into a self-service tool.
Okay.
Right. And I think it's great to empower people with that.
So you're saying would be, okay, a dashboard in the pure definition for you is on one page and it's rather static, just presenting more or less the situation and showing awareness and letting them know, okay, where do I need to have a closer look at for decision making, or calling someone, okay, you need to take action because, I don't know, we need to close country ABC or whatever, something like that.
Yeah, that would be a dashboard. That would be sort of the standard Stephen Few definition, I would say, of that. And I think that's what you want, at least as a basis. But again, the self-service tools are great. And if you've got a tool that gives you both that functionality, lets you drill down within the dashboard environment, then I think that's also fantastic.
Because normally if you see a dashboard, it should, track your attention and then say, okay, now I want to see the categories. Now I want to see why.
Yeah. Well, if you see a problem, you want to drill into it, right? You want to say, what happened that we went down, right? Sometimes you can do that in a dashboard. Sometimes you need to pull in an analyst. You need to do a SQL query. You need to walk across the room and talk to people or something.
And as you have much more experience in this part than we both, actually 20 years with bad dashboards, do you think anything's changed through the years? So does the interactivity play a bigger role now than 20 years before?
Oh, yeah, definitely, right? And this is kind of back what I was mentioning with, when Tableau came on the scene with the with self-service, right? So things have changed a lot since then. Tableau was a game changer. I mean, I think the game has been changed. So I'm not pushing Tableau at all, but I think at the time, 10 years ago, that the whole self-service thing was much more prevalent. It used to be like at eBay, what would happen is we'd get someone come in and they were like an ex-Bain consultant or something, and they'd want information. We'd say, okay, here's the SQL editor, learn SQL and get it, right? And that's what they do. They were smart people, and pretty soon, half the people in our office here in Amsterdam had learned SQL, or at least basic SQL, because that's how they would do self-service, right? And now it's much more, you're much more capable of getting it through a tool.
But okay, so the tool or the name you just mentioned Tableau a couple of times, but it doesn't really matter from the idea that you have, let's say, the methodologies of dashboarding, of visualization. This is more or less the added value, and then of course there's the need for an interactive tool, depending of course on the purpose of it, but it doesn't really matter as long as you have the methodology for dashboarding and for visualization, more or less. You will also support that argument, right?
Yeah, it's really the technical details that come on top of that.
Okay. And then I guess you mentioned it very briefly at the end of your presentation that you also offer a course in Amsterdam. Maybe we can just close the loop here, that you again maybe say a few words what people can expect from this course, and maybe we can also show it the link again, and you can also add a few ideas on that, and then
Yeah, no, great, thanks. So most of the work I do is consulting, like working in companies. I do teach part-time at the university, and I do a number of trainings on the business skills specifically. And so two of the topics that I train are the communication and also the running projects. So scoping projects, managing stakeholders, managing expectations, that type of thing, specifically for analytics projects. And those two topics I'm covering in a 2-day training and open enrollment training, as opposed to the in-house trainings that I give. That's coming up in Amsterdam in September. So if anyone's interested in that, feel free to check out my website.
And the QR code is in fact working. I checked it already.
Yeah, I'm so proud of this QR, generated code with the little dragon and everything. It's actually harder to get to work than you would think. But I got this one, so.
Okay. Then thanks a lot, David, for your time, for sharing all those ideas, your experiences. Thanks a lot.
Thank you to you guys. Really appreciate the invite, and good to be with you today.
Perfect. Thanks a lot. And on 11 o'clock, we will continue with the do's and don'ts of self-service with Matthias. So we're looking forward to that as well. And then we continue with German again.
Okay. Thanks a lot. It was an honor.
Thank you.
Thanks, Al.